They've been studying Martin Luther King Jr., and so I brought in a picture book called The Other Side by Jacqueline Woodson and worked with them to facilitate some thinking through thinking maps. They are a series of 8 cognitive maps that can be used in every grade level, every content, with all students. So our struggling students really respond well to thinking maps, as do our gifted students, because it really provides a language for learning for our kids. Start with a brainstorming map where everything and anything can go in this, right? Okay, so I'm going to give you all about 2.5 minutes, okay? During that 2.5 minutes, I want you to write me everything and anything you know about segregation. So you're going to write that right here in this area. Are we good?
Yeah.
Okay, go. And so each of those different maps that you saw has a different cognitive function attached to it. Depending on the kind of thinking we're asking our kids to do, that will really determine the map that the students will gravitate towards. It is time for us to begin mapping our thinking. So I want to start with us describing clover. Okay, and I asked you to kind of think about what kind of words you would use to describe clover. So if I'm looking at my thinking maps in the back, what kind of map do you think we're going to go to if we're going to be describing? Elijah, what kind of map am I going to use?
Double bubble map.
A double bubble? If I'm going to describe?
A bubble.
Now, if I were going to do both, I would do a double bubble. But yes, I'm just going to do a bubble map or a describing map. The maps provide an organizational structure for the students' learning. There's 8 of them. And if they're used consistently, students, all they have to do is they show us what they know on the map instead of trying to figure out, like, what does she want me to put on this map? We're going to be describing clover. Now, when we're using a describing map like we're using here, I want you to think of this spoke here that you see, this line, as having a was on it. So if you actually want to add a was to each of these lines, this will always get you to the adjective, okay? So clover was, give me one of those words. Henry, what's one of your words?
Friendly.
Friendly. So then I'm going to write. And then within that frame of reference, we can do different things. We can add our source. We can add a point of view. So if I wanted to up the rigor for some of my GATE kids in that class, I could say, okay, this particular group, you're going to do this map, but you're going to do it from the point of view of someone else. And then within that frame as well, we start with that so what? Like, so what about this was important? If I were going to write this off the map, that so what becomes their topic sentence in a paragraph. And then when I ended it with that so why does this matter? That ends up being our closing sentence when we write it off the map. As far as the scaffolds go, that lesson was filled with scaffolds. Thinking maps themselves are probably the largest scaffold. And then when you combine those with the sentence frames and the word bank as well, then it's really going to breed success for the students. But the thinking maps are going to provide that organizational structure for learning. And when they're consistent, especially with our English language learners, it's going to make learning easier. For a new teacher, number one, I would recommend that you get thinking map trained. And then you begin intentionally adding them into your lessons one at a time. But really, the rigor with the maps comes with multiple maps. Depending on the kind of thinking I'm going to ask my students to do that day, that will determine how many maps I do. Ultimately, my goal is for students to be writing, because writing is hard. And I used to always tell my students that writing is your best thinking on paper. And the thinking maps are going to be providing you the organization for your writing.